Hi guys, and welcome to Remove for Launch, and we're in the office again. We're still coming out of the throes of lockdown, so I haven't been able to get any new cars. As mentioned in my last video, I wanted to give you a run through on my car buying journey throughout my entire life so far. And it's been quite interesting reminiscing, just to sort of look back and see everything I've driven. I will do another video about other cars I've driven that didn't own for one reason or another. But this video is about everything I've actually owned or had access to as a company car or whatever. And there's been some real crackers on there and some real suspect choices. Maybe not my choice. Who knows? I'll let you know. Anyway, so I'm going to give you a run through. Appreciate your feedback on this. Anyone else who's got some experience with any of these cars as well, be great to hear from you. So this is where I start. Interesting. A Cavalier 1.7 turbo diesel. Wasn't my car. I actually left college and was looking for work before going off to uni, which never actually happened. But I got a job helping out a rep who had lost his license because he could not keep his right foot under control. And he had this rep-mobile, and he said, I need someone to drive me around to get my appointments, otherwise I'm fired. So he paid me, and I worked a couple of days a week just driving around, which for me was brilliant because I had a brand new, this was bearing in mind the age of, what, 18, 19? I had a brand new Cavalier, and it had a cell phone. Yes, not one of these. This was one of your more traditional phones that was wired in. But it didn't stop me from feeling like a hero as I drove around on my phone. The car was, in my mind at the time, awesome, but that was because I'd been used to driving the learner car. And now I suddenly have access to this whole new rep-mobile. And it was brilliant. I thought it was superb, but then I didn't know any better. So to be fair, for me, in my defence, at the time it seemed superb. To be honest, it cruised along well. Got a good mileage to the gallon, and it done what it needed to do, and in front of the ladies it was impressive because yeah, I was a young lad with a Cavalier. Yeah, looking back now, doesn't sound quite so hot, but as a first car to chug around in, because I got to keep hold of it in the evenings, which was brilliant, absolutely awesome. So for about 3 months I was doing that and had a brand new Cavalier. What more can I say? As a first car, or access to a first car, absolutely superb. Now, next up came the Astra 1.6 16 valve. Now, the 16 valve back in the day made all the difference. You guys won't remember. You won't remember the fight between going from 8 valve to 16 valve and even a 24 valve in some cases. This was a big deal. If you had a 16V badge on the back of your car, made all the difference. Absolutely superb. So you don't realise what it was like. Now, to be fair, this was my parents' car at the time, and I had just got out of the Cavalier. I had access to this. They were foolish enough to insure me on it. I said I would look after it, like all young teenagers do, given access to the shiny parents' car. And that was my first hard lesson learnt when using someone else's car. Don't crash. Not great. Yeah, I got stitched up. Some smart arse decided to bang his brakes on, and who got the blame? Yeah, that went down really well. Probably one of the most trickiest, well, probably the trickiest conversation I've ever had to have. There's been a lot of things in life, in business and everything, that I've had awkward conversations, but going back to my parents that day and explaining that I'd just ripped the front of their car off, yeah, that was not a great conversation to have. Yeah, not my finest moment, and I still don't know to this day why my parents gave me access to their car. But there you go. Foolishly, they did, and I repaid them by destroying it. So yeah, not my proudest moment. Now, obviously, after writing their car off, they decided that maybe I needed to get my own, which, to be fair, I've been saving up for, but I thought, yeah, this might accelerate the process. So my brother was moving on from his car, and he had a 1.3 Nova SR. Now, this was the ultimate car for me because it had Recaro seats. Okay, they were brown. Don't know who chose that interior, but it had Recaro seats. And it had alloy wheels, and it was a 1.3, and it had SR, Sport Rally or something that it stood for. And to be fair, brilliant little car. It cost very little to run. It had a little bit of a fun factor in it. As a first car, the perfect first car to own. It was brilliant. It was cheap to insure back in the day. It was cheap to run. Most people could work on it, even myself, who didn't know what he was doing. So yeah, it was a great little car, perfect size to thrash around. They didn't weigh anything. They didn't have a lot of power, I think about 90 brake. But I did, to be fair, I did get a K&N air filter, switched it out, which they reckon was good for at least another 1 to 3 brake horsepower. And trust me, I felt every brake horsepower I could in that car. I actually remember sitting there, driving along with my friend going, wow, can you feel that? And he even said yes. I'm not quite sure what he was talking about, but we won't go there. But no, brilliant first car. I know everybody looking back now makes you wonder. And you had obviously other cars coming out then. You had your XR2s, and there was always that rivalry between Vauxhall and Ford. And you had your, the RS Turbo was coming out and everything else a little bit later. So it wasn't nippy in the grand scheme of things. But I loved it as a first car, a car to learn in that was pretty safe as well, to be honest. I do actually remember as well thinking I was a hero because I managed to get the back end step out on me. I thought, wow, I know what I'm doing here. I could probably even drift this. I don't know what I was thinking. I just couldn't drive and basically made a royal cock up and the back stepped out on me because I just cocked up completely. But somehow I managed to turn it around in my mind that I was a hero behind the wheel. Very strange. Now, moving on, I then had to get something a little more practical. No, I didn't actually. Basically, that was getting a bit long in the tooth and over, and my dad at the time worked for Vauxhall, so I could get access to Vauxhalls on the cheap. Some will say, why would you? I would argue actually Vauxhalls weren't as bad as sometimes the press made out. But I did have, bearing in mind I was still a young lad, and I'd gone through college and didn't have huge amounts of money to my name, and I was basically able to get access to a Vauxhall Vectra 2-litre turbo diesel, which was pumped out about 100 brake horsepower. And it was brand new. And I was around the 20 mark. And I'm thinking, this is brilliant. This is amazing. I wasn't looking at it at the time of what's the ultimate handling performance car. I was looking at it, I can get this car for about £100 a month. But that was taxed, insured, serviced, everything. It was phenomenal value. And at my age, genius. But yeah, it was great. Actually, the engine was good. It pulled well, had a load of torque. It was a good car and it was brand new. And I was just like, wow, another shiny new car for me at this early on. I'm doing something right. Or maybe it was just because my dad could get a cheap car. But anyway, it was great. It done what it needed to do. It didn't set the world on fire from a performance point of view. But again, you've got to look at it in comparison to what else was available at the time and what I could afford, which wasn't a lot. So that made it epic. And I did have an incident in that as well. Yeah, not great. That was my going down, if you come out of a multi-storey car park and you got the swirly exit, I decided because we were stuck in traffic and it was just taking forever to get out, that I would turn the ignition off and just roll down. Forgetting that the servo-assisted brakes and power steering wouldn't be very effective, so I had the steering lock off and the key ignition, but not the engine running, and found out to my dismay when the car wouldn't turn or stop properly and I rolled into the car in front of me. Yeah, again, not my most outstanding moment in my car driving history. But even so, you learn the hard way. I looked like a dick, but, and trying to explain that to the guy, I remember standing there while he was ranting and going basically ballistic because he wasn't particularly, or didn't have a very good fuse on him. Bear in mind it was a nudge. There was actually no damage on his car whatsoever. There's a tiny little scratch on mine, nothing on his, but he had the snob factor. He had a Volkswagen, I had a Vauxhall. He decided his Volkswagen Passat was so much better than my my Vauxhall Vectra. But yeah, he was very, very strange because he did get up in his high horse about the fact he had a Volkswagen. I don't know. But anyway, quite rightly, he was a bit annoyed and he said, "What were you doing?" And I went, "I didn't see you." Not really the best answer when you've got a guy who's irate, who's got his shiny new Passat just been nudged into, and you're in a queue in the car park and claim you didn't see him. Yeah, that was a rabbit in the headlights moment. So, yeah, not proud of that one. But no, the car, do you know what? For what it was good fun. It done what it needed to do. It took a load of crap in the car. It hauled a lot of stuff around. I was just going to get a job at that point, and why not? Good fun. So moving on, I really stepped things up. I took a massive jump and I went for a Vauxhall Astra. Yeah. Basically this was my first company car. I'd finally got a job. Originally worked in London, now came out of London and was going to get a company car. And wow, I was really happy at the time. Anyone who's bought or had the chance to get a company car, you quite often get a list, and unless you're very lucky, but there's usually tier structures and a selection of what you're able to get hold of. And it was pretty pants. And it had to be relatively practical because I had to put stuff in the boot and I had to chug around in it, and I couldn't be too uneconomical, etc., etc. And I was scratching my head wondering what to get, and then suddenly the new Vauxhall Astra 2-litre SRI became available. 16 valve, don't forget, had the 16 valve on it as well. To be fair, it just come out, that version. I can't even remember what mark it was now. You'll see in the picture. And I thought, that'll do. And it wasn't too bad to insure, so the company would cover it, and it was on the list, so why not? So that was it. I got the Astra SRI, and to be fair, it was brand new out, and they managed to squeeze the extra body kit on it, the Impreza body kit, which actually didn't look too bad, and the Impreza exhaust, etc. And it was alright. Do you know what? It was a good car. Again, Vauxhall's always had really, really bad press. It was okay. Yeah, it didn't set the world on fire, but do you know what? The engine was strong, it pulled, it was reliable, it was comfortable, it cruised well, and for a B-road thrasher, do you know what? It wasn't bad. But then I didn't have a lot to compare it to be absolutely fair. My history so far had consisted of Cavaliers, Vectras and Novas. So maybe anything would have felt special. I'm not sure. But no, it was great. It was alright. I felt like a hero in it. It was fine. People liked it. It looked nice. And that was my first experience of going to a car club. Yeah, that's right. I went to the Vauxhall something or other meet that took place in, I can't even remember where it was, a long time ago, in some giant caravan park type place. And we sat around and we all parked our cars up and they were all highly polished, and that was it. And I sat there for a while and kind of wondered what we do now. But no, to be fair, that was my first experience of getting to know other petrol heads, other enthusiasts. And yeah, I suddenly sort of realised that there was this, you know, there was a club, there was this group of petrol heads out there who also thought like me. And that was good. That was my first experience of that, and it really enjoyed it. Okay, not the most thrilling car, but do you know what? It served its purpose. It done a good job. And it was a company car, and at the time, it didn't cost me a lot. What more can I say? Now, me and my brother decided that we would start getting a bit more serious about our car buying journey. My brother had his own journey, wanted something a bit more interesting, and I decided that, you know, after enjoying the Vauxhall Car Club and enjoying the Astra and everything else, and still had that as the company car, I wanted to step it up again, up the game. And my friend at the time had bought a Lotus Esprit, I think it was an SE, if I remember correctly, a 2.2 litre turbo, and the car was phenomenal. Absolutely blew me away. Yeah, it was a bit old school, the dash and the layout and the cockpit and everything, but the performance, the handling, the ride, everything was absolutely superb. So we started to look at what options were out there. We were going to take the plunge. We were going to do our first car purchase together, which presented its own interesting route to car ownership. But that's, yeah, I'll go on about that in a bit. We looked around. It wasn't, nothing Italian was going to be on the market. We didn't want to go for your German sort of AMGs and M cars and things. We wanted something, you know, focused, sports car, small, 2 seats, preferably with the roof down, etc., etc. And we ended up settling on a TVR Griffith 500, 5-litre V8. And it was superb. Absolutely loved it. And I miss that car to this day. Absolutely miss that car. It was just superb. It was such a good car. And, you know, you hear all the stories and the horror stories about, oh, they let you down, the electrics, this, that, and the other. I will be honest, it let me down once. I was sitting in central London. I'd gone to see a friend. It was ridiculously hot, and we were stuck in traffic for about 45 minutes. And the car finally just went, I'm overheating. So I just pulled it up to the side of the road, done the typical TVR or anything, sat there, left it for half an hour, started up, everything was fine. It was just, it had a problem with the thermometer. And that was it. But apart from that, the car never let me down once. And it was gorgeous. The sound it makes, I still to this day think that it's one of the best sounding cars you can get. Yeah, there's obviously all sorts of other cars out there that sound fantastic, don't get me wrong. For what it was, it sounded superb. And it was great. It was light. It weighed next to nothing. Obviously, it was fiberglass. It was the interior was lovely. It did get a little bit toasty on a hot day. You needed a change of clothes. On a cold day, it kept you warm with the roof down. It was great. But obviously, you had the drive tunnel, drive shaft sort of running down the right next to you, and the gearbox and everything else was, you were literally on top of it. You know, you had a big old lump that was pushed right back. So that was keeping your toes warm, but it was just superb. It was the first car I got that true like wow moment, where every time you started it, every time I looked at it, every time I washed it, every time I was driving in it, particularly with the roof down, it just was what being a petrol head is all about. Absolutely loved it. Just the rumble, just the start up, everything, going back to when it was in the car park, going out for drives, and we did with my friend and others. There was he was part of the Lotus Car Club. We went to so many different meets, so many different drive outs in it. It was absolutely superb. I still miss it to this day. I don't care what people say about TVR. They obviously had their problems, but what manufacturer doesn't? Even today, with all the modern technology, you still see Ferraris and horror stories of them on fire, or Lamborghinis, or whatever. But yeah, it was superb. Yes, it wasn't the ultimate handling car. You wouldn't want to thread it down a twisty B road too vigorously. It wasn't going to keep up with something like an Elise. But just for a cruise, putting your foot down, giving some very interesting cars a bloody good run for their money. Yeah, absolutely, just phenomenal car. Still miss it, wish I had it. If I'd had the money and the space, would have kept it forever. Just an absolutely fantastic car, and will never forget just how good it was. The TVR had to go. Circumstances changed. Me and my brother didn't always agree on, everything, because you were trying to share this car, and I wanted to use it all the time, and he wanted it, and the usual. Anyway, so it's actually worked out surprisingly well, but we decided it was time to move it on, because we needed the finances for other things. So it was lovely, absolutely brilliant car, but had to move on. And at that point as well, my company car was coming to an end, and my job role had changed, so I didn't need the load lugger anymore, and I had other car options available to me. And I originally I wanted to keep some of the feel of the TVR, but wasn't able to get a TVR, even though it was a close thing, and I'll touch on that in the other video. But I had the option of some two-seater sports cars, and I looked at the S2000, drove it, loved it, thought it was a great little car, bit twitchy, but that was, very, very interesting car. But the insurance was steep, and the company wouldn't cover it, which was rather frustrating. So I looked at what else was available, and there was the Z3 2.8 litre. Yeah, interesting. I remember getting screamed at by a guy who was in a very knackered old BMW and his friend calling me a hairdresser. So that kind of sums it up. But no, it was actually surprisingly good. It was a good solid engine. It sounded nice. It was a wider body kit because of it being the 2.8, so it didn't look too bad at all. It was quite a nice looking car. I've always quite liked them. And you know what? Yeah, you could argue it was a little bit of a hairdresser's car, but it was still a 2.8 litre. And at the time, that was a straight six. It sounded nice. It drove well. That was a bloody good engine. And it was good. It was good. Everything worked. It was solid. It just was a good little car. But it couldn't handle 4 horse. It was not good. Not good. Very short wheelbase, not particularly well sorted, and it would have happily put you in a hedge quite easily. But you know what? It ticked along. It was just a good little car to muck around in. And even though you did look like a bit of a hairdresser, to be honest, on a warm summer's day or evening with the roof down, with that engine, it was still a lot of fun. And at the end of the day, I enjoyed it. That's all that mattered. It was fine. It was good. It wasn't going to set the world on fire, but it was a bloody good car. Now, at this point, my car buying journey kind of tanked. Took a nosedive, but for all the right reasons. Basically, the company was being sold, and part of the deal was I could take the Z3 with me. It was signed over to me. I had to buy it off them, but for a small amount. And that was it. I took the car over. I immediately went from there, decided to do my own thing, left, took the car with me, and sold it immediately to use the money to launch my own business. Yes, now that's a whole different story and a whole different ballgame. And that could be a whole different YouTube channel. And I'd love to talk about it, but I'd be going on for a long time. even more than I am now. But that was it. So I took the money. I still need the car. I went to my friend who was a car dealer at the time and said, what have you got for about £600? Oh yes, big budget. And he was kind enough to do me a deal. And we did work out a deal. And I did buy a Citroen Xsara 1.4. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Don't know what to say really. It looked like someone had taken a mallet to every panel. Had no creature comforts. It did have aircon, and then when I tried to put the aircon on a warm day and wondered why it didn't work, and I looked, popped the bonnet, looked down at the grille where the radiator is, and it was like a banana. So yeah, it was that day I discovered it had obviously gone into a lamppost or something. So that was fun. So I had no aircon either. But do you know what? It was still a great car. And the reason being is it cost nothing. It looked crap. You couldn't have any more dents in it, so it didn't matter where you parked it. It had a 1.4 engine that didn't do anything performance-wise, but at least it was cheap. It went, it stopped, it was reliable. And actually, do you know what? I've heard all these stories about Citroen and the Citroen being able to, you know, with all their amazing suspension technology they've had over the years. I was amazed at how comfy the car was. Yeah, it couldn't handle, but actually for just cruising along the motorway at sort of 70 miles an hour, the car was brilliant. It was like wafting along on a cloud. It was superb. The car was shockingly bad. It done nothing at all from a performance of driving point of view, but it just done what it needed to do. And I hate saying it, you know, being, I want a car to get me from A to B. No, but that was what it was there for. That's all I could have it for, because I had 600 quid to spend. And you know what? It was brilliant and didn't let me down. And even better than that, when it came to getting rid of it and selling it, I got my money back, 100%. Literally got the whole back. So a year of ownership, got every penny back on it. Absolutely superb. Cheap motoring at its best. So, after a while of being sensible and driving the Citroen Xsara, I decided that enough was enough. I needed something that was going to invigorate me again and actually help me enjoy driving again. So I started to look for, again, something that wasn't going to cost me huge money, but was, you know, a lot of fun. And I was racking my brains, and there had been a time previously where my brother had an Integra Type R. So I actually started to look at them. But they have understandably held their money very well. And they were quite top end of what I was looking at budget-wise at the time. And trying to find a good one. Because there aren't that many around, I was trying to find an original UK spec. And I wanted, you know, as low mileage as possible and as good a condition as possible, because some had obviously been abused and mucked around with, and you know, had a pretty hard life. And whenever you found a good one, it was gone within seconds. And I remember finding two or three and sort of, right, I'm coming up to see it, and it was gone. I was like, oh, right, okay. Before it even appeared in Auto Trader, it was probably done and sold. I was like, ugh. So I started to look at other options and something a little bit more affordable. And at the time, petrol had been spiking and people were having a bit of a meltdown because we had gone past the, you know, pound a litre mark and everything else, and it was all getting a bit like high performance cars were getting hammered and losing money. I started to look at what is out there that maybe some people are taking a bit of a hit on, and that was it. I saw a Subaru Impreza Turbo, and it was, I'd started to have a bit of a look at those anyway, but this one shone out, and it was basically one owner from new, full service history, absolutely immaculate. It had about 30,000 miles on the clock, and it was brilliant. It was completely original spec, and I went and had a look at it, and the car was just amazing. Literally showroom condition. The guy who had owned it beforehand had obviously, I got it for dealer, but had obviously garaged it and polished it and serviced it and everything else to within an inch of its life, and it was absolutely epic. So I went for it because it was just such an outstanding car, and owned that for several years, and it was brilliant, as good as I say. And this wasn't a new one at the time, but it was superb. It was just so impressive. It wasn't the ultimate in performance in a straight line, but when you got it onto a B road, it was phenomenal. It was everything they had always said it was. It was just, it handled and went brilliantly, and on undulating B roads and the way our B roads are with potholes and everything else, it was superb. Just absolutely incredible car. And when it rained, literally nothing could touch it. It was phenomenal. And we went on an amazing driving holiday, and if anyone knows it, went over to Wales, North Wales, and there is what they call the Evo Triangle, which Evo magazine used to, and still does, I think, use to an extent, and Wales has got amazing roads, but this Evo Triangle is just a brilliant, it is a triangle, and it's just a brilliant mixture of roads, almost like one section is almost alpine, and one section is very twisty sort of B roads, and then over some moorland and everything else, and it's superb because the road changes so much. We were thrashing around there, and I was with a group of friends, and they were in some interesting cars, and one was in, at the time it was a Mini Cooper Works, and again that was 200 plus brake, and the Scooby was about 230. And it was superb, but when it rained, literally nothing could touch the Scooby. It was so phenomenally good when it rained on twisty B roads. Absolutely loved it, brilliant car, but it was an absolute gas guzzler, and that was the biggest problem because of the permanent four-wheel drive. If you ever tried to push one, just took the handbrake off, tried to push it, hard work, really hard work, and you realise why. It didn't matter how you drove, your driving style, whether you took it easy, whether you cruised along at 50 miles an hour in fifth, it was just bad. It drunk through the fuel, but it was phenomenal. And I did have the stand exhaust. That was the first thing I changed the exhaust immediately. Phenomenal. Just gave it, I didn't go proper sort of Jap speed massive bean tin, but I did go a nice exhaust. Opened up the engine note, sounded phenomenal, went brilliantly, had a little bit of mapping work done on it, but nothing too much. It was really, I put it on the rolling road and it was lacking power. Got the MAF sensor changed, which was quite a common thing with them, and got it up to the full sort of 230 odd brake and just had it smoothed out. Superb. It was absolutely phenomenal car, and again, another one, a bit like the TVR, if I'd had the space and the money, would have kept it indefinitely because the car was so perfect in every way, and the condition of it was brilliant. And even when I sold it on, I got back most of my money, and the car was phenomenally clean. The guy was staggered at just how clean and tidy it was. Superb, loved it, just absolutely amazing car, and still miss it to this day. And you know what, it could show a lot of cars a thing or two even now, because it was still light, even though the four-wheel drive obviously made it heavy, but overall it was still light. And for handling the B roads now, it really could show some cars what it's all about, and I think some of that magic's been lost in the newer stuff. Now, whilst owning the Scooby, I also had some opportunities with some other cars, and it's a bit of a strange one because I wasn't really in the market for anything else, but there just various things happened and business was going all right, and I was more interested in actually feeling like I'd worked my backside off and I was going to have some fun. And also what I decided was a bit of an experiment from a car ownership point of view is, could you buy the right car at the right price and not really lose any money, or not cost you that much to have something pretty special? Not top end stuff, we're not talking way up, but stuff that's interesting, like Porsches mainly. And that's what happened. So whilst I still had the Scooby, the opportunity came up to buy a Porsche Boxster. It was the 2.7, so it wasn't the 3.2, the Boxster S, but it was a very, very nicely spec'd 2.7, had all the right trim, all the right colour, it was absolutely lovely. I grabbed it, and my view was I would run it for a 6-month window, obviously because it'd be tying up some money, but I'd see A, what the whole Porsche experience and fuss is about, and B, how much could I run it for in that 6-month period? What would it actually cost me to run, and would I lose much on it? And I'm glad to report, actually, not a lot at all. It was nice to get back into a convertible. It was nice to have that sort of second car thing, so I was using the Scooby just to go to work and back, and then have this as my sort of weekend toy. And it was lovely, and I honestly, I can see what the fuss about is about the Boxster. It was mid-engine. Yeah, it wasn't the most powerful, and to be honest, again, there was a big argument about in the straight line, the Porsche would actually outdo the Scooby because of the aerodynamics. And on the twisties, particularly like I said in the wet, the Scooby, the Porsche would see which way the Scooby went on the right road. But that didn't mean the Porsche was bad. The Porsche was still a phenomenal car on the twisties, and I'd love to have been able to drive both cars at once somehow. But yeah, it was fantastic car, and loved it. The engine was great. Had a nice engine note. Not as good as I'd like it to be, not as vocal. I sometimes find that with Boxsters, they're not quite as vocal as I'd like them to be. But absolutely superb. It never missed a beat. It was brilliantly reliable. It looked nice. I felt good. It had that feel good factor when you got in it, when you went back to it, just everything. It was just felt really, really nice and really well built, really well screwed together. And taking the roof down again, and that experience of having the roof down. If you've never driven a convertible, you won't know. I was never fussed originally, but once I started driving convertibles, actually it does add this really nice element, and there's something very, very nice about driving around in the British countryside on a summer's evening with the roof down. There's something absolutely superb about that. And then having a nice, well put together car that sounds good, that goes well, that you can thread down a twisty B road on a summer's evening. Absolutely superb. And the Boxster done everything so well. And I can understand why people buy Boxsters. And I think sometimes they don't get as much credit as they deserve. It was superb. Loved it. And I'd love to report that I did sell it 6 months later, roughly. And pretty much got back, got back every penny. Didn't lose a penny on it. Just the standard running costs. But it didn't need a service. The brakes had been done. Tyres were good. So I ran it for 6 months. Several thousand miles, and all you had was your petrol, tax, insurance. That was it. Absolutely superb. Loved it, and wouldn't be surprised to end up with another one at some point. Fantastic. Now, moving on from there, I still had the Scooby. That had gone, and then this other car presented itself. Would you believe? Several months later, a 911. The friend who I mentioned earlier, who was the car trader, he had run a lovely 996 911. Convertible, which wouldn't have been my first choice, but beggars can't be choosers, and he was moving on and he was willing to do a good price on it, and it was absolutely loaded with spec. And I thought, I've often wondered what the whole 911 thing's about. I've experienced the Boxster, absolutely loved it, couldn't fault it. What's the 911 experience going to be like? And I went for it. It was a bit more money, but again, I went with the plan of this is not a long-term thing. We're just coming into the spring. I'll run it until summer's over and see how I get on, see what the experience is like. And interesting. Probably the first, I picked it up, drove off in it. Lovely, yeah, ooh, new car, blah, blah, blah. Went out the next day, got up, bright and early. Sun was up. It was a Sunday morning. Went out, loved seeing it on the drive. It was just like, okay, let's go for it. Actually quite disappointed. Very strange. It had the noise, typical, slightly bag of nails when it first starts, but it had that noise, it had, the performance there, but it just felt a bit lacking. Bearing in mind I was still driving the Scooby, so I wasn't short on sort of performance cars, or, the performance as it were. And I kind of went, all right, this is all right, this is okay. I took the roof down. Yeah, you had the convertible experience, but I don't know, I honestly to this day don't know what it was. Maybe I was in a bad mood, who knows. But for that first week or so, I sat there going, I think I've just wasted a lot of money. And let's hope I can get most of it back. But by week 2, everything started to change. And I started to use the car quite a bit more. I started to almost use that as more of my regular car and went on the commute to work and everything else. And it just, I think what it was, there was a deeper sort of skill set the car had. And, these attributes were maybe buried a little bit more than what I've been used to. But when you actually got used to it, started pressing on a bit more, started using it a bit more, really sort of leaning on it that much more, it did start to really shine. And even though it's convertible, so not quite as sorted as the hardtop, you start to really go, hang on a minute, this is interesting. So maybe I've been spoiled by the Scooby and then a mid-engine Boxster, but once I sort of adapted my driving style, started to use it a lot more, put some more miles on it, I started to realise just what a phenomenal car is. I really did get the whole 911 thing. I'd always wondered what it was all about. And at first I really thought it was a lot of crap, basically. And then towards the end I started to realise, do you know what, I can understand why 911s are so good and so popular. Because I know the engine's in the wrong place, it's slung right out the back, etc. But Porsche just know exactly what they're doing and how to develop a car. And they've taken that to the nth degree now. And I'd love to try a much newer one. But even at the time, the 996, the problem was a lot of people didn't like it. They didn't like the look. It was maybe the dash was a bit cheap and everything else. It wasn't quite what it should have been. But you know what? They could handle. They could drive it. It was a brilliant car. It had an amazing Bose sound system. It had, every creature comfort you could want. It had the engine note. It just went really, really well. And it was phenomenally quick. it was, you know, surprisingly, it was a lot quicker than you necessarily noticed. And it played the GT car role really, really well. And on a few weekends and trips away and road trips and everything else, the car was faultless. It literally was just brilliant. And I used to love coming out. I'd do a hard day's work. I'd literally be putting in a 14, 15-hour day. You'd stagger out. Everybody else had gone home. The car park's empty. And there it was sitting there. And I only had a 5-minute commute, which would become several hours. Just drop the roof, summer's evening again, you know, after work, hard day, get in that car. Everything was just okay, just phenomenal. Your tough day was forgotten about, and that long drive home was suddenly a lot of fun. So I believe it was good for my soul, and I believe it was good for my mental stability during tough times at work. So that's my excuse for having it. But it was a bit of an experiment. I wasn't keeping it long term. The idea was to get rid of it, and I did. And it was about 6 or 7 months in, and I sold it on. And to be fair, I'd had to have the central locking system, computer thing, whatever it is, changed, which wasn't cheap. It's about 600 quid. And I'd had to have a decent service. But again, I bought it at the right time with most of the major works done, got it at a decent price, sold it on at a decent price, and pretty much, I think, lost about, you know, obviously running costs aside, I'd lost about £600 on getting that lock changed, the central locking system changed. Apart from that, nothing else. Pretty much got my money back on it. So I had 6 to 8 months of 911 ownership that cost me very little indeed. And if someone said to you, do you want to rent a 911 for probably about £800 for 6 months or 8 months, I think most people would take that. But yeah, really like that. Can absolutely fully understand the whole 911 thing and why people never go for anything else. Absolutely superb. And it makes me want to try turbos and GT3s and GT3 RSs and 2s and everything else more and more, because that was just a superb car. So can't fault it. Hats off to Porsche for what they do, because it's absolutely phenomenal. Now, I'd obviously had my fun. I'd had a good run of cars. So I still had the Scooby, I'd had the Boxster, I'd had the 911. Brilliant. But now work was changing and I had to get sensible. Basically, I had to do boring stuff like employ more people, buy a bigger office, etc. Which is all great, but costs money. And I thought, you know what? I've had a good run of cars. Maybe now's the time to get a little bit more practical and concentrate more on the business. So I decided the Scooby was, even though it was fine, it was costing quite a lot to run and it was getting a little bit long in the tooth. And I thought, I'll go for something sensible. I'd also just started road biking as well, which was thoroughly enjoying and still do. But okay, let's get something practical. Had a look around, but practical and fast usually added up to quite a bit of money. I was like, no, I've got to be sensible here. So I ended up with an Audi A4 Avant, Estate, whatever you want to call it, 2-litre TDI S-Line. Now, it actually looked really nice. Had the full kit, you know, it was lovely, sort of like seal grey kind of colour. It was absolutely superb. Looked really nice, really well put together, really economical, went well. It was the 140 brake version, not the 170 brake. But even with the S-Line looking nice, it didn't really do much from a driving perspective. It was fine. As a cruiser, as a load lugger, actually not the most practical load lugger. Couldn't get my bike in there, so I ended up with a rack. Unless you took all the wheels off. And anyway, that's another story. But it was just a really nice, good car that just, as an A to B wagon, it was brilliant. And it was just everything it needed to be. And I ran that for a while, good couple of years, and it was fine. It done everything it needed to do. And yeah, it was superb from that point of view. But it was never a car I ever wanted to get up on a Sunday morning and go, I'm going for a drive, like ever. I don't think I've done it once. It was a shame. I lost my interest in driving, which is quite sad. I've often had that sort of feeling where, the weekend you think, I'm going to get up early, the weather's going to be good, and I'm just going to go out for a drive on my own and just drive for the sake of driving. And there's something, not everybody will resonate with that, but hopefully you guys will, as petrol heads, resonate with that, just going for a drive and that sense it can give you. And you need the right car for that. And the Audi was not that car. But phenomenally good car. It just could have done with having an RS badge on it. But that was that. It was good, but that was it. Now, with the Audi, my thirst for driving was not really being quenched. So another opportunity arose. I think all my cars, the best cars I've had, most of them have come from just an opportunity that sprung up out of nowhere. Somebody else I knew worked in the car trade. and he used to get all sorts of weird and wonderful trade-ins. And he suddenly phoned and went, I have a Golf VR6 available. I was like, okay. He said, fancy a track car? I was like, well, maybe. He had always wanted to do track days. I'd thought about it, hadn't given it much thought. Then I'd got to know another group of friends who were very much into track days and got introduced to it and gone along to track day and thoroughly enjoyed it and just been thrashed around Goodwood in a multitude of awesome cars and just absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. And then this call came out of the blue, and it was a Golf VR6. And he said maybe it would make the perfect track car. I was like, yeah, why not? What's it going to cost? £200. Yes, that's right. It was a trade-in and it was worth 200 quid. And it was a bit of a shed. The paintwork wasn't great. But you know what? It went. Mechanically it was sound. I checked it out. Superb. We went about actually turning it into a proper track car. And what a phenomenal track car it was. This was my first introduction to track driving in my own car. I'd done a couple of other experience days and things like that, but I was like, wow, this could be actually a lot of fun. We did. We went down the route of we stripped it out. I had enormous pleasure in ripping the interior out. We put in seats and harnesses. I went through eBay for weeks, and we ended up with a roll cage and everything else, and suspension. And we upgraded the discs and the brake fluid and everything else. And luckily, through this other circle of track day friends, we had a guy who I still use to this day called Gareth, who's a whiz with track cars, and he set it up. And you know what? We turned it into actually quite a good track car. VR6s are not ideal because the gearing is awful. And if you leave it in its normal standard guise, it handles a bit like a boat, but the engine is solid, not the most powerful. I mean, what is it, 2.8 litre V6, 170 brake, so certainly wasn't breaking any records for the power output, but you know, it was a good solid engine. It sounded superb. A neat trick for anyone who's got one, and you're not too fussed about what you do with it. The mechanic went, there you go, I've chopped out the bottom of the airbox. I was like, okay, drove it. Hey, absolutely superb. So if you've got one, do that. Sounds amazing. Makes the engine note so much better. But do you know what? It was a brilliant intro to track day driving. But basically it didn't cost us anything. So we didn't really worry about whether you went off straight into a tyre wall, apart from killing yourself, or taking out someone's 100 grand Porsche Ferrari. It's kind of down to them to stay out of the way. But no, all seriousness, it was a great car to learn in. It was nose heavy. There's no way around that. Even with all the suspension mods and strut brace and everything, it was still nose heavy. It was very understeery, but you could just play around with it. You couldn't really get out of shape unless you'd done something very stupid with it. So as a practical car to learn in, absolutely superb. Sounded great, always sounded, got comments about how good it sounded. Not the fastest car, but faster than a lot out there because literally it didn't cost anything, which is always a massive advantage. When you're driving around a shed that owes you nothing, that's definitely worth a good few seconds a lap. Absolutely phenomenal. So yeah, loved it. Such a good practical car. Loved it. So I was having my track day fun, but not enough of it. I don't get enough track time in. It's really annoying, but it's really just down to time, finding the time to do it. And because of that, even though I had the VR6, I wasn't really getting much of my sort of appetite for driving satisfied because my day-to-day car was the Audi and it was just a good practical car, but wasn't a lot of fun. And by this time we had another practical car in the house, so I was like, okay, what else shall I get? But there were still some restrictions. I couldn't go out and get a two-seater. I still needed to be able to carry more than two people in the car for work, and I needed a bit of a boot, and I needed some practicality. So it was trying to get a performance car that was practical, which is both easy and not easy. So if you've got a phenomenal amount of money and running costs, you've obviously got your M5s and your RS Audis and everything else. But I didn't want to be stepping up that much. And I also wanted something that was, I quite like and still believe, particularly for British B roads, that, you know, something that's not too big makes a big difference. And I had a look around at what was out there, and I didn't really want to go down the full-blown M route with M3s and everything else, because trying to find a clean one and trying to find one that was affordable for what I was looking at within my budget and everything else, and all these other reasons, I kind of discounted the M cars. I looked at a lot of other options, and then I kind of went, actually, I remember when I had the 911, I'd had a little bit of a tussle, a little bit of a play with someone in a 335 BMW, and I thought that was surprisingly quick. That gave the 911 a pretty decent run for its money. I started looking at them, and it was trying to find a clean one, a good one of them. And there was some out there, but I started looking at else, and I thought, well, what else is around as well? And that's when I stumbled across the 135. And I remember reading reviews at the time, when they first came out, that actually they were quite a good, accomplished car. Obviously, you got the M version then that came out, but prior to that, the 135 had been pretty well regarded, and also not many around, and I quite like that. They're not, some people like them, some people don't from a looks point of view, but I've always quite liked them. They're a little bit quirky, a little bit different, and they're a nice size, a good size. And that was it, and I've done a full-blown video about this, so I won't bore you with the ins and outs of it. You can watch my video, which I go on rambling on about for ages, so you can watch all of that. But yeah, that was it. I then got the 135 and have been saddled with that since. And I'm still, well, with everything going on now, obviously things have been a bit trickier and turned upside down, but I am now looking to change it. But do you know what? The car has been phenomenal. It's been superb, and there's a reason for it. It's just because it's a bloody good car. And this brings me on to my last car purchase so far to date, and it's another track car. So the Golf I was actually not getting rid of the Golf. The Golf was going well. I was enjoying it. I was still learning everything you can about track days and the tracks themselves. I haven't driven every track, and the ones I have done, you need to drive them a few times to really get to learn them. But then a friend of mine had his M3, which if you watched my other video about the E36 M3 track car, that's the one I'm talking about. He, for personal reasons, needed to get rid of it. He was looking to sell it on, and I'd already been in it and knew what an amazing and phenomenal car it was. It had loads of the work done, been set up brilliantly by Gareth yet again. It had some extra bits thrown on it that we agreed to, that Gareth worked on and set up. So, you know, even better suspension, exhaust system, etc., etc. But again, watch the video. I'll give you a full run through on that. But that was it. I wasn't going to actually get it. I wasn't going to get rid of the Golf. I sat there and went, do I bother? And then it was like, well, is there going to be another opportunity? If I tried to buy something like that M3 myself and do it from scratch, A, you've got to try and find a tidy one. B, there's a lot of work to be done. I worked out that was going to cost a phenomenal amount of time and money and effort. Whereas this was a tried and tested car that was well regarded within the sort of track day circles, and you know, Nick, my friend who had it, knew how to hustle it, and it was an impressive bit of kit. And I went for it. I wasn't planning to, but I went for it. And it's been a whole different dimension on track driving, because it was about twice the power, about another 100 brake at least on top, which is pretty phenomenal in its own right. Rear-wheel drive setup, completely different setup basically. So the whole thing's been turned on its head. So I was learning, and then feel like I've been thrown in the deep end a bit more. But still a phenomenal rear-wheel drive car to learn in. So it's been superb, and such a different beast to the Golf. Probably one of the biggest issues has been actually that the Golf was worth nothing. The BMW is worth something. So suddenly your driving style changes because you sit there a little bit more paranoid about going off the track or getting rammed or going into a tyre wall or something. But no, absolutely superb car. So glad I went for it. But in a way I missed the Golf because it was just such an easy, good, fun car, and no one really expected much from it. Whereas the Beamer is great, but I forget though, it's more of a classic car now, but absolutely love it. So now I've got my 135, which I've covered in the other video. I've got my M3, which I've covered in the other video, and that's it. And that's where I'm at with my buying journey. It's been a long video. If you've got any questions or stories about your own versions or thoughts on any of those cars, please let me know. Please comment below. I'd really appreciate it. You know, it's been an interesting journey. I've realised that I've actually had access to some nice cars, and I realised I've had some really suspect cars, and I also have realised I need to start buying more cars because I want to start having a lot more fun in cars, doing a lot more road trips which I miss, which I haven't done for a long time, getting together with other sort of petrol heads which I haven't done for a long time. This COVID thing has not helped. It's spoiled the track day fun, although they're opening up again now, so that's good news because we can actually start to hit the track again, which is phenomenal. Looking forward to that, can't wait. May let the first one or two go because everybody's going to be like, have this pent up sort of lack of driving anger or something, so who knows what the first one's going to be like. But no, I'm looking forward to getting back out on track, looking forward to starting to get some more cars under my belt and enjoying them, and then hopefully bringing you some videos and my thoughts about them. Look, really appreciate you hanging around. If you've got to this point, you're a star, because I wouldn't have. No, it's absolutely phenomenal if you have got this far. Really appreciate you watching. Would love a subscribe if you can. It really helps me out. A thumbs up, a comment. Thumbs down actually helps as well, but prefer not to get those. But yeah, give us your feedback. Really appreciate you guys. Thanks very much. This has been Removed Before Launch.